This morning, Egypt has received a list of 13 Israelis and 39 Palestinians scheduled for release today, the third group in the four-day truce deal. As the National Security Advisor just told me, the White House has reason to believe that group could include at least one Israeli-American dual citizen. Here at home, aid to Israel is still uncertain. House Republicans passed a $14.3 billion aid deal earlier this month, and new Speaker Mike Johnson has vowed to back separate legislation combining Ukraine assistance with tougher border security measures. Joining me now is the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio. Welcome back to Meet the Press, Congressman. Thank you so much for being here in person on a very big day. We really appreciate it. So let's start with what we know about this release of hostages. In addition to the three that the White House has said they anticipate will be released, there are still 7 other Americans who are unaccounted for. Is it your expectation that those 7 Americans, based on the intelligence that you have, are still being held hostage? Do you know if they're alive?
Right. Well, you know, it's been very curious that the administration is so quick to claim this as a Biden deal. And as you just heard from Jake Sullivan, he continues to say we know every detail, but then he can't answer your questions as to those details. You know, our expectation is there are 10 Americans that are being held out of the 240 hostages that people who are missing. No one really knows the number. Jake Sullivan was saying that he doesn't even know the number, nor do we know the proof of life. And you would have thought if they're claiming credit, this is a Biden deal, that those are details that we would have conditioned this process through, because the aid that's going into northern Gaza, that's a condition that Hamas required, includes American aid. So, you know, obviously, I think everyone's very concerned. But one thing I think it's also important here is to understand that the word hostage barely describes what these people have been through. I mean, these are not detainees. These people were not in Gaza. They were in their homes in Israel. They witnessed the brutal murdering of their families, neighbors, and friends, and then were kidnapped from their homes into Gaza and have been held in brutal conditions. And as we know, some of the hostages have been killed. So I'm certain these hostages, these individuals that have been kidnapped and being released, went through a very brutal time.
I want to ask you more about the intelligence that you have, but to your point about whether this is a Biden deal, you heard Mr. Sullivan just say to me that the details are very sensitive. Does the president deserve some credit, given that he has been working on the phones with the leader of Qatar, Egypt, Israel, to try to get this temporary pause in the fighting?
Right. I think people would expect nothing less. And certainly it appears that the administration has stepped up for that.
So do you give him some credit?
Absolutely. I think what's curious, though, is that this is a period that's fraught with peril. For them to be so quick to claim credit for a deal that we don't know what's going to come out of this. I just think it's very dangerous.
Speaking of the perils here, do you have any concerns that Hamas is delaying the release of American citizens to use them effectively as bargaining chips, Congressman?
Exactly, which is why I'm concerned that the Biden administration didn't make it a condition of this deal that Americans be in the first hostages that are released, especially since American aid is going into Gaza right now, into northern Gaza, as part of the conditions that Hamas had. I think you know, when the administration says they know every detail and then tell you that they don't even know if they're alive, that is certainly concerning. Also, the aspect, as you raised in the interview, is the Red Cross is supposed to be having access now to the remaining hostages. So we're supposed to be getting information as to what their condition is, who is being held, because the hostage lists today are based on people who are missing.
And Jake said that he expects that ultimately that will happen potentially by tomorrow. Why is that so critical? And do you anticipate it will happen by tomorrow? Are you getting any information that points to that?
Well, I think it's very, this is a war zone. And so it's very, unknowns are rampant. And the other aspect here is that we're not even sure that Hamas has all of the hostages. There are other radical groups within Gaza that might have possession of some of these hostages. We're not sure which ones are alive, where their bodies may be in either Gaza or where Hamas has held them. How will the Red Cross be able to tell us who's alive and who's not? And that is part of certainly the terrible distress that these families go through. People who've been told that their relatives are deceased are now finding they're alive. People who believe they're alive may find out tragic news.
I want to ask you big picture about how Israel is conducting this war. As you know, the IDF has taken the head of Al-Shifa Hospital in for questioning. Israel, the United States have said that their intelligence points to the fact that Hamas is effectively embedding itself inside al-Shifa, inside other hospitals. Do you think the United States should release its intelligence publicly, or at least more information publicly, to help make the case to people globally who are saying too many civilian lives have been lost here?
Right. I think we have to remember that right now this is a war zone. And Israel has openly stated that its goal is to take out Hamas and Hamas's control of Gaza. Hamas still has control of Gaza. When this ceasefire period ends, as Netanyahu has said, the conflict will continue. And that conflict will continue, as Israel has stated, until Hamas is removed. Obviously, one of the issues that you have to look at in releasing intelligence is that since this is a war zone and you're trying to enter into that dialogue of what has happened, you still have things that can impact the outcome. You need to be cautious.
Given that, though, one AP report described what has happened in Gaza as a, quote, uninhabitable moonscape. Just to push you a little bit, does there need to be more transparency about the intelligence that Israel has, about the intelligence, frankly, that the United States has about Hamas?
Well, I think it certainly is beneficial to tell the story of what Hamas is,
Would you
what it
support
does.
more transparency? Should more intelligence be released?
Certainly on the issue of Hamas, because the Palestinians are as much prisoners to Hamas in Gaza. Once Hamas won its election, however rigged it may have been to take over Gaza, there's never been another one. They are absolutely being suppressed by Hamas itself.
Let me ask you about the growing global pressure on Israel to commit to a full ceasefire because of concerns about the high civilian death toll. This comes, as I was just talking about, amid growing calls for U.S. aid to Israel to be conditioned on a plan to limit civilian deaths. Is that something you would support?
Well, I think the White House has been clear, and I think U.S. policy has been clear of lessening the Palestinian casualties that are not Hamas. And I think certainly Israel has made it clear in the areas in which there's going to be conflict and trying to get people to leave those areas to lessen those casualties.
But would you vote for that if it came to you, if it was introduced as legislation, conditional aid to Israel?
Well, I wouldn't propose it, but I think it does accurately reflect U.S. policy.
Okay. Let me ask you about Iran. Do you, big picture, see, we know that Iran obviously funds Hamas. Do you see this as a proxy war between the United States and Iran?
Oh, absolutely. And they see it as their proxy. I mean, they state it is. And they state that it is their proxy war against the West.
Should the U.S. take action against Iran if it continues to escalate?
Well, I think we currently are taking action against their proxies.
Direct military action?
I do think against their proxies. I do think that the administration should step up its effort in protecting our own troops in Syria and Iraq who have been subject to attacks from Iranian proxies. But you're right, these are absolutely Iranian franchises, funded, trained, and stood up as terrorist organizations to attack the West.
President Biden, as you know, has asked for a robust aid package that would include aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, Taiwan, funding for the southern border. Is this something that you anticipate could pass by the end of the year?
I think it'd be very difficult to get it done by the end of the year. And the impediment currently is the White House policy on the southern border. The White House in this package, including it as a national security package, recognizing that the southern border is a threat, put in funding, but it's going to need policy changes. Congress is going to require that there be laws changed to make certain that the border returns to its prior state, perhaps remain in Mexico, other types of provisions that would secure the southern border.
Let me ask you quickly about the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He just made the decision to release, and he started the process, 40,000 hours of footage from January 6th. The Capitol Police have expressed real concerns that that could jeopardize the security of the Capitol. Do you think it was responsible to release all of the footage from January 6th?
I think it's important for Americans to know the truth. This has been fraught with an unbelievable amount of misinformation and untruths. And I think this, when you see the footage yourself, it's going to give you an understanding of what was there and what occurred that day. Because we're currently only, depending upon really partisan descriptions of what happens. Now the American people can see.
Well, and speaking of which, some of your Republican colleagues have cherry-picked some of the images to, frankly, further some conspiracy theories. Do you Are you comfortable with that?
I think it's been cherry-picked by both sides. I mean, certainly the January 6th Commission
But let me ask you about your colleagues. Let me ask you about
view.
your Republican colleagues in the wake of this footage being released. Are you comfortable with, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene posting, suggesting that this was an inside job by the Capitol Police? She removed the tweet, of course, but does that make you
You'll
uncomfortable?
have to talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene about that. But what I will say is I think it's important that the Speaker has taken this step because now people can see the truth.
Congressman Turner, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Great to have you here in person.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.